The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting a muted golden hue over the small garden that sat hidden between old stone walls. The air was thick with the scent of blooming roses and lavender, an intoxicating fragrance that hung heavy in the evening. It was here, in this forgotten corner of the world, that two couples would cross paths. Ava and Elias. Ava had always been drawn to the garden. It was a place that felt like an escape, where she could breathe without the weight of her responsibilities suffocating her. She had been visiting it for years, ever since she had moved into the crumbling manor on the edge of town. The garden was wild, untamed, much like her spirit had once been, before love had shackled her. She had fallen for Elias the moment she met him. He was an artist, brooding and silent. Yet there was something magnetic in his gaze, something that anchored her. He loved her fiercely, with an intensity that both terrified and exhilarated her. Their relationship had always been one of extremes: passion, jealousy, and an unspoken understanding that neither could live without the other. Tonight, as Ava wandered through the garden, her fingers brushing the petals of the roses, she felt something stir in the air. Elias had been distant lately, his presence slipping away as if he were unraveling. She couldn't explain why, but she knew deep down that the shadows were growing longer between them. Lena and Jasper. Lena had never meant to fall in love with Jasper. Their relationship had started in a whirlwind of lust, something spontaneous and reckless. But as time passed, she found herself ensnared by his dark charm, his inability to let go of the past. He had a history, a past marked by violence, heartbreak, and betrayal, and Lena had always thought she could save him. They had come to the garden that evening in search of something neither of them could name. Perhaps it was peace. Perhaps it was an answer to the questions that had been plaguing their relationship. Jasper was difficult to read, his moods fluctuating like the wind. He was calm one moment, fiery the next. Yet, something in his eyes made Lena feel as though she was falling deeper into a chasm every day. The encounter. As Ava strolled deeper into the garden, her heart heavy, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Elias standing in the shadow of a tall oak tree, his face unreadable. He had a way of showing up at the most unexpected moments, like a specter from her past. "Elias," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I've been waiting for you." But instead of rushing into her arms, he simply stared at her, his eyes dark and cold. The air between them crackled with tension. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly, his voice barely more than a breath. Ava blinked, confused. "What do you mean? I've always been here." He shook his head, his gaze hardening. "This garden, it's not ours anymore." Before she could respond, another figure stepped into the moonlit clearing. Jasper, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "We were just looking for some peace," he said, his tone more of a warning than a greeting. "I hope we're not disturbing you." Ava's heart raced as she glanced between Elias and Jasper, the connection between them palpable. She knew immediately that something was wrong. This wasn't a mere coincidence. There was an unspoken history between these men, a history that Ava was not yet ready to understand. Lena stepped forward, her expression calm, but her eyes wary. She looked at Ava with a mixture of curiosity and caution, as if trying to gauge her place in this strange, fragile moment. "Lena," Ava finally said, her voice faltering, "what is this? What's happening here?" Elias sighed and took a step toward Ava, his hand brushing hers. "I wish I could explain," he murmured. "But there are things you don't know, things that shouldn't have been. Not like this." Jasper's gaze hardened. "Stop, Elias," he snapped. "The past is gone. It's time we all faced it." Ava felt the blood drain from her face as a chilling realization dawned. The garden wasn't just a sanctuary. It was a trap, one that held them all in its delicate, poisonous embrace. The dark secret. As the night deepened, the truth began to unravel like a twisted vine, strangling their hearts. The garden, once a symbol of peace and beauty, had been the site of betrayal and madness. Long ago, Elias and Jasper had been more than just friends. They had been bound by something far darker, something they had both shared with Lena. They had all been entangled in a love triangle, but it had been far more than just love. It had been obsession, violence, and a deadly game. In the garden, under the cover of night, they had made a pact that would keep them all together, even if it meant destroying each other in the process. Ava had unknowingly stepped into the aftermath of that pact, the final piece of a puzzle that was meant to never be completed. "You wanted me to forget," Elias said, his voice breaking, "but you can't forget what's been done." Jasper's lips curled into a twisted smile. "No one ever forgets, Elias. They only pretend." And Lena stood there, frozen, caught between the two men she had loved, the two men who had ruined her. She knew deep down that she had always been a pawn in their game. But she couldn't leave. She had never been able to leave. The final choice. Ava stood at the edge of the garden, her pulse pounding in her ears. She didn't know who to trust, who to believe. But as the moonlight bathed the scene in silver, one thing became clear. This garden, this place of beauty, was their prison. "I can't be part of this," Ava said, her voice trembling as she turned to leave. But Elias stepped forward, grabbing her wrist. "You can't escape, not now." The garden seemed to close in around them, the shadows stretching like fingers, pulling them back into its fold. Ava's mind raced. She had to get away. She had to break free. But as she looked into Elias's eyes, eyes that once held love, now only cold emptiness, she realized that there was no escape from the darkness that had taken root within all of them. With a final, desperate glance, Ava pulled away from Elias's grip and ran. But the garden, with its secrets and lies, would never let her go. She could feel it watching her, waiting for the inevitable return. And so, in the heart of the garden, where whispers and memories lingered, their fates were sealed. 4 lives, bound by love and betrayal, forever trapped in a cycle they could neither escape nor forget. Title: Whispers of the Garden. The garden had always been a sanctuary, a place where the air was thick with the scent of jasmine, roses, and earthy soil. The old stone walls kept the outside world at bay, making it feel as though time stood still in this corner of the earth. But tonight, the tranquility of the garden would be shattered by the collision of 2 worlds, 2 loves that were not meant to exist in the same space. Ava and Elias. Ava was raised in the quiet traditions of her family, a long lineage steeped in Christianity. She had been taught that love was sacred, that it existed for eternity if nurtured right. Her mother had taught her the importance of faith, devotion, and the belief that God had a plan for every soul. The garden had always been a place of peace for Ava, but tonight it felt like an altar, a place where she would be asked to sacrifice something precious. Elias was the opposite. He came from a family of strict Muslims, raised in a home where faith, discipline, and devotion were everything. Elias had always struggled with the boundary between his religion and his desires. His family had taught him to honor his beliefs above all else, to never question the path laid before him. But from the moment he met Ava, those teachings became a murky haze in his mind, swept away by the storm of her presence. Their love had bloomed despite the differences, despite the barriers that society had set for them. But in secret, in stolen moments, they had found something pure and beautiful, until the world began to encroach on their sanctuary. Lena and Jasper. Lena and Jasper's story was woven with similar threads of complexity, but theirs was more fraught with bitterness. Lena had always been a rebel, free-spirited, outspoken, and dismissive of tradition. But even her wild heart had known the sting of rejection. She had fallen in love with Jasper when she was young, when her beliefs had seemed unimportant. He was her first love, and she had been consumed by him. Jasper, however, was different. His family was staunchly Catholic, just as hers was. Their love had been a forbidden one from the start. The pressure from their families to stay within the boundaries of their own faiths had suffocated their relationship, leaving both of them broken, disillusioned. And now, as they stood in the garden, with its beauty mocking the anguish they had both endured, They realized they had nothing left but the remnants of their shared past. The tension in the air that evening was palpable. Ava and Elias had come to the garden to meet, as they had many times before, in secret. But tonight felt different, heavy with unspoken truths, and Lena and Jasper, though they had come to seek solace, would soon find themselves drawn into the web of unacknowledged love and unbearable distance. The meeting. As Ava stepped into the garden, her heart ached with anticipation. Elias was already there, sitting on the stone bench beneath the towering oak tree that had witnessed so many of their conversations, their stolen kisses. But tonight, there was no warmth in his gaze, no tenderness in his eyes. His face was grim, and his posture was rigid as though he had already made up his mind. "Ava," he said, his voice tight, "we can't keep doing this." Ava's heart sank. "Elias, please, we've been through this before." "No," he interrupted, his tone sharper now. "This isn't just about us anymore. It's about everything we stand for, everything we believe. Our families, our faith." Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't care about that. I love you." Elias rose from the bench, his hand shaking. "But I do care, Ava. I have to care. My family, my faith, won't allow this. You know that." The words cut deep. They were words Ava had heard before, but they had never felt so final. She reached out to him, desperate, but he stepped back, pulling away from her touch as if it burned him. "I can't be with you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Not like this." The ache in her chest was unbearable. She wanted to scream, to beg him to choose her, but she knew it was futile. Their love was an impossible dream, a fleeting shadow that could never touch the light of reality. Lena and Jasper's encounter. Lena and Jasper wandered deeper into the garden, unaware of the drama unfolding under the oak tree. They had come there seeking a moment of clarity, to decide whether they could move past their shared history, or if their love was forever doomed by the same unyielding forces. But as they reached a clearing, the sight of Ava and Elias stopped them dead in their tracks. For a long moment, the two couples simply stared at each other, the weight of the situation pressing down on them like a suffocating fog. Lena felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The tension between Ava and Elias was palpable, and she could see the raw pain in their eyes. Jasper, too, took in the scene with quiet disbelief. It was as though they were all caught in a delicate web of fate, threads that had twisted together long ago, leaving them trapped in this moment. "Ava," Lena said softly, her voice trembling. "Elias, what's going on?" Ava's gaze flickered between them, her tears threatening to spill. "We can't do this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We can't be together." The words were like a dagger, sinking deep into Lena and Jasper's hearts. They had always known that love was difficult, especially when it was forbidden, but the pain they now saw reflected in Ava's eyes mirrored their own, love tangled in the impossible and the forbidden. Elias met Jasper's gaze, and something passed between them, something old, something tragic. They both understood, perhaps for the first time, that their family's expectations were more than just rules. They were chains, and they had been bound by them their entire lives. The bitter choice. For a long time, there was silence. The weight of religion, of duty, of love twisted around them like a shroud. The world outside the garden might have been bustling with life, but here, in this sacred place, they were all held prisoner by their beliefs, by the walls they had built around their hearts. Finally, it was Lena who broke the silence. "I don't want to live in the shadow of something that's not mine to control," she said, her voice strong but filled with sorrow. "I'm done pretending." Jasper, his eyes hard, nodded slowly. "Maybe we're all just fighting a battle we can't win." Ava stepped forward, looking directly at Elias. "If you can't be with me, then let me go," she said softly, her voice a quiet plea. Elias didn't answer immediately. His heart was torn between his love for her and his duty to his faith, his family. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he nodded, his eyes filled with unshed tears. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I wish things were different, but they weren't. They never would be. And so, under the quiet watch of the moon and the stars, the two couples turned away from one another, the garden a witness to their sorrow, to the love they could not have. Title: Whispers of the Garden. The garden had always been a place of refuge, a quiet haven where Ava and Elias could escape the world, where they could forget the walls that divided them. It was where their love had first blossomed, a fragile secret that grew stronger with every stolen moment. But the weight of their family's expectations, their religions, and the world that demanded conformity made each meeting a delicate balancing act, a fragile thread that could snap at any moment. Ava and Elias. Ava had grown up in a Christian family, deeply connected to the traditions that had shaped her. Faith, family, and a sense of duty had been woven into every aspect of her life. Her love for Elias was a rebellion against everything she had been taught, against the boundaries drawn by her faith, her family, and society. Yet, in Elias's eyes, she had found something she couldn't live without, a love so deep, so consuming, that nothing else seemed to matter, not even the divide that stood between them. Elias, too, was caught between two worlds. He had grown up in a Muslim family, one that cherished tradition and placed immense value on loyalty to faith. His religion was a cornerstone of his identity, a guiding principle that had always steered him. But in Ava, he found a love that called to him in ways he had never imagined, something that defied logic, that refused to be contained by rules and expectations. Every touch, every whispered word between them was a rebellion against the life he had known. Yet, every time they met, the tension between their two worlds grew stronger, and the walls of their faiths felt insurmountable. Lena and Jasper. Lena had always been a free spirit, a seeker of truth who had little patience for the boundaries imposed by religion. Raised in a devout Catholic family, she had often questioned the strictures that defined her existence. She had fallen in love with Jasper when they were both young, their bond forged in the fires of rebellion. But as they grew older, the reality of their family's disapproval and the pressure to conform began to weigh heavily on them. Lena had left Jasper once, convinced that their love could not survive under the weight of their differing beliefs. But despite the years apart, despite the brokenness, they found themselves drawn back to one another, their connection as undeniable as ever. Jasper, too, was caught between his love for Lena and the expectations of his family. His father's voice, strong and unwavering in its demands for him to remain true to his Catholic roots, echoed in his mind. But Lena was different from anyone he had ever known. She was wild, untamed, and yet she made him feel more alive than he ever had before. Despite the disapproval of both their families, they had found solace in each other's arms, a love that transcended religion, a love that defied everything they had been taught. The garden. The garden remained their sanctuary. It was here that the two couples had met countless times, each encounter layered with the same intensity, the same longing, and the same fear. As the years passed, it became increasingly difficult for them to ignore the truth that hung in the air. They were falling in love with people they were never supposed to love. Their families would never accept their relationships. The divisions between them were too great. And yet, despite the pressure, despite the constant pull of the world telling them no, they couldn't stop what had already started. One evening, as the golden light of sunset filtered through the leaves of the ancient oak tree in the heart of the garden, the two couples found themselves once again standing in the same space, uncertain of the future, yet knowing they could not turn back. Ava and Elias stood hand in hand, their hearts heavy with the burden of their love. The time had come for them to make a choice, to face the consequences of their love, and to decide if they would surrender to the impossible or fight for the life they wanted together. Their love had endured the harshest of tests, but they knew that their families would never accept it, that the weight of tradition would always threaten to tear them apart. "We have to decide," Elias said softly, his voice filled with resolve. "If we want to be together, we can't keep hiding. Our love, It's not just ours anymore. It's something we have to fight for. Ava nodded, her eyes filled with tears. She had always known that their love would never be easy, that it would require sacrifices, but she had never imagined that it would come to this. She had never imagined that the choice between love and faith would become so clear. "I don't want to live without you, Elias," she whispered, her voice trembling, "but I don't know how to reconcile this love with everything I've been taught." Elias stepped closer to her, cupping her face in his hands. "I know, but I love you, Ava, and I believe that love, true love, is stronger than anything else, stronger than our families, stronger than our religions. It's worth fighting for." As they shared a long, quiet kiss under the stars, Lena and Jasper watched from a distance, their hearts heavy with the same uncertainty, the same longing. "We've always been told that love can't exist across boundaries," Lena said softly, her voice barely more than a whisper, "that it's impossible for people from different worlds to be together." Jasper looked at her, his hand brushing against hers. "But what if love is the one thing that transcends everything? What if we're meant to create our own path, to build something new, instead of living according to what we've been told?" Lena turned to face him, her eyes wide with emotion. "Are you saying we should marry? Despite everything? Despite what they'll say?" Jasper nodded, his eyes filled with determination. "Yes. If we love each other, if we believe in this, then nothing else matters. We can make our own way. We can be together." Jasper looked at her, his hand brushing against hers. "But what if love is the one thing that transcends everything? What if we're meant to create our own path, to build something new, instead of living according to what we've been told?" Lena turned to face him, her eyes wide with emotion. "Are you saying we should marry? Despite everything? Despite what they'll say?" Jasper nodded, his eyes filled with determination. "Yes. If we love each other, if we believe in this, then nothing else matters. We can make our own way. We can be together." And in that moment, in the quiet stillness of the garden, the two couples made their decisions. The wedding. Months passed, and both couples fought to build their future, defying the odds. The love that had once been whispered in secret now demanded to be seen. Ava and Elias, though torn between their families and their faiths, chose each other above all else. They stood firm in the face of opposition, their love like a flame that could not be extinguished. Their wedding was an intimate affair, held in the same garden where they had first fallen in love. The only witnesses were the flowers, the trees, and the stars above them, as they exchanged vows that bound their hearts together forever. Lena and Jasper, too, made the same choice. They chose to marry in a quiet ceremony, defying their family's expectations and forging a new path together. It was not an easy decision, and there were sacrifices along the way, but in the end, their love was worth the fight. Their wedding was a testament to their strength, their resilience, and their belief that love was stronger than any tradition, any faith, any wall that sought to divide them. As the two couples stood side by side in the garden that had borne witness to their journey, they realized that the boundaries that had once seemed insurmountable were no longer relevant. Their love had transcended the divisions of faith, of culture, of family. And though the road ahead would still be difficult, they knew that as long as they had each other, nothing else mattered. Epilogue. Years later, the garden remained a sacred place for both couples. It was a symbol of their defiance, their love, and their commitment to one another. They had built a life together, one that embraced both faiths, both traditions, and most importantly, a love that could not be contained. The garden had become a sanctuary once more, but now it was a place where two couples, bound by the strength of their love, stood side by side, united in defiance of the world that had tried to keep them apart. And in the whispers of the wind, in the rustling of the leaves, you could hear the echoes of a love that had conquered all. The love of Ava and Elias, Lena and Jasper, who had dared to marry each other despite everything,